So today you wanted to talk about logotherapy and
This was new to me out of the book Ikigai, Morita therapy.
Morita.
Shoma Morita.
Spell?
Morita.
Morita.
He apparently created this form of therapy. Where is it? But he had a background in Zen Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And so his therapy apparently focuses on not changing emotions, but accepting emotions and still following through on the actions that you have to.
It's in keeping with the approach, if you want to even use that action-filled or action-implied term. The Krishnamurti approach, the Zen Buddhism approach, which says lay not a finger on life. You say, wait a minute, every time I pay attention to something that changes, right, do what you do anyway. So this is close to Zen Buddhism, it's very close to Krishnamurti, who said you don't have to go sit, watch all the time.
Right.
And realize that the only real freedom you have is in seeing it, which means that free will is mostly a delusion. And when the neurophysiologists and even other spokesmen of spiritual people point to it, they say, observe how an action takes place and then the consciousness follows it and then claims it. Ego co-opts it. Ego said, that's mine. I did that.
Right.
So there's always that split between the body and the fragmented Cartesian mind,
right,
which most people experience. So what they're trying to do is, what Morita will do is to disconnect it, disconnect all those secondary movements, discharge them, pull the plug on them, so that basically what he says is go back to the simplicity. And that's why I understand the therapy technique requires a great deal of aloneness, rest.
They said 15 to 21 days of basically complete isolation, and then slowly reincorporating yourself into a habit structure, and then reincorporating yourself into society over time.
Right. But first you've got kind of go do I wouldn't call it a cleansing, because you're not really gonna, what you're gonna find is kind of dirty.
Yeah.
You're gonna go be alone for a while, talk to nobody, just rest.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's why I wrote the quote down, Inster Quilinis Invenitur, which is, if I got that correct, it's Latin for in filth it shall be found.
You find the truth.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately, a very difficult thing for a lot of people, because as I've been saying right along in these videos from time to time, people idealize themselves. They're never wrong. I didn't do that. How many times do you expect people will always defend themselves? And that's where the self-idealization begins, and it starts very early. When kids start to lie, they're defending themselves. Self-idealization is just another, it's a self-defense writ large. It's because it's mostly based on lies and delusion and et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, to go back to this, for those people who don't remember or don't know, logotherapy itself was developed by Viktor Frankl, who spent 3.5 to 4 years in Auschwitz and Dachau, the two deadliest, biggest killer camps the Nazis had, and he survived. And what he came out of that with, first of all, he was a psychiatrist before he went in. His whole family was killed. He lost everything. But he said the people who were able to survive under those hellish conditions, where they're starved and beaten and live under the most terrible conditions and work all day long. People just die working. The people who survived were the people who could look forward to something.
Right.
Could put at least a future, a purpose. And it's true, if people don't see something in their future, they're in grave danger. If they're the type of people that want to end their lives, they can. I know from studies in the past, and even something I observed, that the people who attempt suicide are the people who feel disconnected to everything and everybody. There was a guy down at the corner one day, and he was always kind of a low and negative guy, but then he got to a point where he doesn't even want to talk about baseball. That's crap for this. He wasn't interested in anything. He went home and killed himself. And those are the symptoms. There's a lot more to this. So logotherapy was excellent. The only thing is, it was a disappointing thing for somebody like myself reading it, because I was looking for something a little more less dependent on conditions. Because basically, he said, even the man who looked forward to having a piece of pie was able to survive. As long as that thing drove him. There's a causality in the future. Not all causality is from the past. Here's an existential point. Causality is what draws you. Think about that. That implies the human mind and the human consciousness, and that's a strong point of existentialism. People don't talk about that. You never hear anybody. I haven't even mentioned it in, it's got to be 50 years since I told somebody about that. Sartre, I think, taught that to me. I'm pretty sure Sartre. You're like the donkey with the carrot hanging over your nose. And there's a whip that drives you from behind, but also the carrot makes you keep going. And of course, the carrot's always receding, because that's the nature of the world for the Sartrean and the Buddhist, and the esoteric Christian. Basically, people who recognize that Buddha was right. He held up the candle and said, "This is who you are. You are on fire with desire." And I've used terms like Sartre's la néant, the nothingness. I've talked about the void and being at the heart of everything. There's the good news. There's the good news. You don't have to stay stuck with the horror that I am made out of nothingness. You are a conscious being, which is way better than being an object. But people want to turn themselves into objects. So anyway, I can get off and talk about that as quite easily. But back to logotherapy, you can see where it would have value. But I still think that it's a movement away from the center personally. So I like what Morita says. He's saying basically go back to the core, go back to the simplicity of your being, go back to where there are no projects.
There's no, what I see in it is that you're decreasing the distance, you're decreasing the obstacles between you and doing, instead of creating more hesitation to do what you have found needs to be done. You just do it, right?
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yes, I do, and I agree. I would look at it just from, to me it's a big wheel, so I'm on over here on the wheel, you're over here. I look at it as not even in relation to doing it. I'm just trying to, if I do it that way, I just want to find myself at some place where I am not trying to fix the thing. Because there's where the exhaustion comes in, when you're trying to fix the unfixable. And I think that's what we do. And I know at this age of my life I can still see the mechanism, because basically you're trying to avoid suffering. It's really that simple. The Buddha was right. Everybody thinks of the Buddha in very high and esoteric terms, but basically he started out saying, I want to find the end to suffering. And then of course he found the only end to suffering is to transcend the one that suffers. And boy, is that hard. That one is as difficult as trying to have a relationship with another person. We know how hard that is. Anybody who's been alive for a while knows. Anyway, So I like the simplicity of the Morita approach because it reminds me so much of Krishnamurti and Tantra. Tantric Buddhism is, do what you will. Again, lay not a finger on life, which means what? Just do what you will, but be alive and awake during that time.
Right.
And of course, if people hear that, they struggle. Like I remember when we came upon Krishnamurti, several of us, a couple of us, and it used to be, I got to really be awake to myself. I got to look to see the beginnings of the dreams while I'm in the middle of the afternoon. You're looking for every little thing, and the more you look, the more you close it down, right? You're like slamming the doors on stuff. It's not going to come up now. It's going to come up when you're not guarded. And so you realize his message is not that simple because it's not heard by simple people. It's not heard by uncomplex people, simple people. Nobody is singular-minded. We're simple-minded in being stupid, but we're not singular-minded. So what we do with that is we try to make that consciousness the cure for all the bad stuff. We automatically try to fix it. So this is a challenge. The Morita approach is a challenge. Just like any of the high esoteric spiritual paths are real challenges. They seem to be so simple. That's not simple because we're not simple. We take complexity into stuff. Look, it says don't even intellectualize about your brother.
Right.
What do I do?
Right.
I mean, I've learned.
So they drew an analogy from a donkey that obsesses about being tied down by a rope to a stake will wrap itself around the stake, just as the same as if we look at our emotions and try to understand them and each facet of them and everything can basically get your focal point away from just being and feeling the emotion, I suppose.
Yeah, except that I'm going to make an excuse for myself. This is what I do. I mean, I started doing it when I was a kid, and it became a profession.
Right.
And it's like fun.
Yeah.
It's more fun for me to have a conversation about it because probably I'm not good at anything else. Don't ask me to set your clock or anything like that. You know what I mean. No, it's true. And I remind myself of a joke that I made up. Picture cavemen, living from day to day, hunting, starving half the time, in danger. But they have a meal. They're cooking something over a fire. And they're talking about the members of the group. And they finally come to the philosopher. And one of the guys says, the philosopher is good. And the chief says, yes, because the philosopher does not hunt. And the first guy says, yes, that is why he is marbled. Now, some people don't understand that. Explain that, would you?
Yeah, it tastes delicious, yeah.
Why? What does marbling mean?
Marbled fat, loaded with
fat.
Yeah,
fat inside.
Like a brisket. Yeah.
I thought that was pretty. I made that
Yeah.
up. Is that good? Could I get money for that?
There's no utility to the philosopher.
No utility except that he tastes good.
Right.
You could when things are bad, you've got a philosopher that
it's funny
gets you through.
In my circumstance, I train people and everything, and it's like the answers to getting more proficient lifting is so simple, people wouldn't believe it. It's like people look for all these new trends and in training, and they want to do this form of training, and I've fallen subject to it too. I thought I would go to a different discipline, it would be completely different. I go to jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is going to be completely different than how I was doing martial arts before. No, it's the same damn thing. I mean, it's different in that you have to fight really hard, but like the way that you learn it is by doing it a lot, right? Like anything else, and then you're gonna fail at it. Like I used to get punched in the face in Kempo all the time, right? You leave your hands down, you get punched in the face. You move wrong, you get hit. That's just part of the deal. You move right, you still get hit sometimes. So the point is, though, in training, it is about being able to just push your threshold an inch. That's all that training is.
That's what yoga, hatha yoga is.
It's a
Do you know
controlled,
that?
yeah.
Hatha yoga means just going, I mean, it doesn't mean this means being yoked to God, but it, the technique, the procedure is to go to your place of discomfort and play in it.
Yeah.
Even though it may not show on the outside, you're playing in it.
Mm-hmm. There's no ego in that, like, whatsoever, as far as I can see. Like, you can't. Nobody knows how hard you're struggling when you're struggling. Only you can really feel how hard you're
I
struggling.
mean, there should be no ego.
Yeah, well, right, but it's such a disconnected thing.
Let's talk about the nature of ego, because it's used so much, and I think people, again, it's another term that appears to be simple.
Yeah.
That is not simple because there are different versions that are hearing it, the term. When you think of ego, what are the most fundamental aspects of ego?
The projected avatar that you can imagine yourself to be, all the attributes, physical, mental, emotional attributes that culminate to being the person that people perceive you as, or
That's
egotistical, or the
yeah,
person that putting yourself up on a pedestal in that circumstance,
Right, that's how people usually think of the term.
Mm.
When you do enough Eastern thought, you realize at a more fundamental level, this little person, think that she has ego?
Yes.
You would say no, generally.
Generally, but yeah.
Dogs, I mean, they can, like I remember when I had my big 100-pound shepherd, he was afraid of a snake. He had no problem coming up to me and pushing against me, and he, no shame.
Right.
No shame, let's just
Right.
get out of here, I'm afraid of that thing.
Right. No, but she also has perception of herself, and she doesn't want to get hurt, and she wants to bark at the world, right?
Yeah, that implies a sense of vulnerability, which to me is the foundation of the ego.
Right.
Because ego by its nature is separative.
Right.
That's the real meaning. It means that I am a separate entity.
Mm-hmm.
And when it arises, it's 2 years old. You're 2 years old, a year and a half for many kids. But it develops, and then there's the day when the child starts to say no, which is a declaration of independence, as I call it.
Right.
It's I am not you, I am not you, you do not own me, I am separate being, basically. That's essentially what it is. Go read Eric Fromm or any of the others and they'll talk about it that way.
Right.
Of course, it shouldn't be debatable. But until then, the child is one with the world, puts everything into his or her mouth, and you know what I mean, like. And there's the polymorphous perverse, unless the child's being abused, the child has experienced a kind of high, almost mystical state with the world. It's like the whole body orgasm. That's what the polymorphous perverse is. Freud used the term, but it came out of other places. The polymorphous perverse. The child's body is just full of delight up to a certain point, and then it begins to separate, and I guess at that point, because it becomes separative, it becomes vulnerable feeling. So these little creatures have that fundamental ego, if you want to put it that way. Sakura called us, said that we all have, and I said this before, we are all alive through the unconditioned sense of or the non-intellectual, the precognitive ego, the precognitive ego, the ego that exists before thought. Okay, and it's always there. That's why I say it's easy to become self-awake, because all you have to do is learn to go back into that. That's there for you. But when we try to fix something, we're still separate from it. I could make a reference to something. Years ago, I realized that when people become, like, say they're doing psychology, and they start becoming critical of themselves, they stand back and they point out all their flaws. That's good, right? Honest. R.D. Lane, one of the great psychoanalysts, and David Cooper, his partner, went to some hospital, some asylum, and dealt with all the psychotherapists there. And he at one point, he remarked in the book that I was reading how honest they were, how brutal they were about themselves. But then he realized something. What was it? The same thing that I had thought at least 10 years before I read this, that they're the ones doing the judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think you're going to judge me like that? I'll judge myself, because when I do that, I stand above.
Right.
There's the Cartesian split that just continues to go on and on and on. There's a guy in Massachusetts who's been claiming he's self-realized for a long time. But I remember when he explained one day, I am a self-watcher. And I don't want to, I bite my tongue. I let him, if you're a self-watcher, you will continue to be a split ego. And you have not transcended ego. You have not transcended anything. You are just self-deceitful.
Mm-hmm.
So, I like the Morita thing because basically it's the lazy man's way or the incompetent man's way, and that's my way.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I can look at something and intellectualize about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I force that intellectualization, it's not going to have any effect. But if the thoughts come out of my self-observation, there I hold out a little hope that something is, it's like they're making announcements to me.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But I don't intellectualize the way other people do. Some people are called analytic. I've been called analytic. I'm not. I'm not. See, if you look at a thing long enough, if you just focus long enough on something, if you're just a lazy guy looking at an idea, just focus on it. What it will do, because this is always in movement. This is the material world. Thought is made out of energy. It's going to do this. Click, click, click. It's going to show you all the sides. If you just keep looking, it'll show you this side. And you can make a list, as I used to do. Make a list of all the ideas that would come out of it. You're just intuiting. You're just sitting there writing. You're just copying. It's revealing itself to you if you have the capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, if you have, done some work.
Right.
Intellectual work, spirit, discipline work, sitting work, that kind of thing. 2.5 hours of hatha yoga every day. That, even if you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Because your girl looks great in a little bikini and you're doing it with her. That's one reason. But you may actually be doing it because you're trying to improve yourself too. Whatever, but that'll give you, no matter what, you get in the ring with a tough fighter, like one of your friends, and you get something out of it. You may have to spend a while healing.
Right.
But things will teach you.
Yeah, certainly.
Anyway.
Yeah, this book is pretty good. I just wanted to mention it. Ikigai, Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. It basically says to put yourself in the center of these 4 major facets of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. So if you put yourself in the center of that, you find your Ikigai. It's an interesting concept.
I'm pretty sure I'm there. At that. I'm not getting paid for it.
Yeah, we left that one out.
We've got, what, 2, 3 people who watch it? I
have,
think Marianne will watch, Roland will watch it.
I think we're in the double digits now, so I think,
Oh, we're getting famous.
I think 11 or 12 is coming up. 11 or 12 subscribers, yeah.
Are you just you're just dangling?
Nope. I think we're going on 12.
Wow, those poor people.
I know.
Are they able to sneak back into the asylum at night without getting caught? Those poor people.
This is probably shut down in several countries at this point. So. Leave us some questions and comments, guys. Let us know how the audio is, as always.